Want to welcome especially those of you who are joining us via streaming, the At Home Church, and we're very glad you're with us this morning. It's going to be a lot of fun. Robert Scheer has been shaking things up here at All Saints for more than 30 years. He's the editor-in-chief of the Webby Award-winning Truth Dig, which should be on your morning reading go-to sites. If it's not already, you need to bookmark that. In addition to his columns, you can find the great Juan Cole, Chris Hedges, Amy Goodman, our friend Sonali Kolhatkar, among many other great reporters and writers. Bob has been at the center of social justice journalism since his days as the Vietnam correspondent, managing editor, and editor-in-chief at the late, great Ramparts magazine. From 1976 to 93, he was national correspondent for the LA Times, and in 1993, he was named a contributing editor and launched a nationally syndicated column at the Times, which ran for 12 years and continues today at Truth Dig. His columns are syndicated by the Huffington Post and The Nation. You can hear Bob on Fridays on KCRW on the wonderful radio show Left, Right, and Center. He's currently a clinical professor of communications at USC's Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. He's the author of at least 10 books, including his latest, They Know Everything About You, How Data Collecting Corporations and Snooping Government Agencies Are Destroying Democracy. We have copies for sale over here, and are you able to stay for a few minutes and sign? Bob will sign your book. Makes a great Easter gift. Almost as good as chocolate. Bob Scheer received the 2010 Distinguished Work in New Media Award from the Society of Professional Journalists, Greater Los Angeles chapter, and in 2011, Ithaca College awarded him the Izzy Award for Outstanding Achievement in Independent Media. And that's all impressive, but what I discovered on Wikipedia yesterday is that Ry Cooder included a line from Truth Dig in his song, No Banker Left Behind. So that's important and important fame to have on your resume. If we gave awards here at All Saints Church, Bob would have a shelf of them for all the courageous preaching he's done here. Please help me welcome our great friend, Robert Scheer.
Thank you. Sometimes I feel guilty that this has become my home. Because my Jewish mother might have some questions, but she used to come anyway to hear me speak here. And this, of course, was the home of Rabbi Bierman, who passed away this year and was a rabbi in residence and one of the really, truly great religious figures and teachers we've had. So it's good to remember. And the kid who's disturbing, I only really took this assignment because I want to launch the political career of Tamayo Roberto Martinez Scheer. And he's half Oaxacan and half Jewish, so he's a shoo-in for mayor in about 25 years of Los Angeles. I don't know about Pasadena. And let me just say, here's my wife, Narda. And for those of you who go to the book festival, you'll know that she launched it. They were having it again in April, now at USC. She was the associate editor of the Los Angeles Times, a co-author with Mary Tillman of the book about her son Patrick Tillman's death in Afghanistan, and she's just finished a book on California, explaining why it's a much better model than Texas. So there. And I'm not going to have you sing happy birthday, but it is her birthday. So, and I must say, this is a great trophy wife to have. And my last little personal note here, I actually was the dirty old man who went to speak at her college a half century ago. Was it 48 years ago? 48 years ago, and we got married. And we've been together, so it's really pretty terrific. And now, what has happened, I actually made the mistake of having Narda go with me to Portland and Seattle recently, and she interrupted. You can't interrupt today because we only have 45 minutes. But she made the point, by the way, I see Bob Berger is here, and he was my editor at the Los Angeles Times during all those years of column writing. I don't want to insult Narda, who is my basic editor, but Bob Berger was the person who basically edited me at the LA Times and took the criticism from the higher-ups and the heat from angry people calling. So I have great respect for him. Yes? I'm going to introduce Sarah. You know, the whole thing is, whatever I do, you know, when we are in the car going back, Nard will say, you really screwed up and you should have done this. And there's a wonderful tape, video we have. There's a great video that they make here, and the speech I gave last year was what launched this book. I talked about privacy a lot, and I have it on our website. But Narda, there's a tape we did in Seattle, and you'll see Narda actually sees the microphone. And she sees the microphone there's two people here who worked a lot on this book. I'm an old guy now, and I really need a lot of help. One is my son, Josh Scheer, who the reason I've been able to write 4 books in the last, 8 years or something is Josh does the actual heavy lifting to figure it all out. And I am fortunate. I have 3 sons who, while they disagree with me about everything in the world, they don't disagree when we work together. It's sort of an amazing thing. If we try talking about what restaurant to go to or anything else, we can have a bloody fight. But I have had the enjoyment of being able to work with all 3. And Josh in particular has allowed me to write these books because he sorts it all out and puts it in nice piles and says, this is what you have to say about this, and this is what you have to say about this. Here's Cara Damaso, who once worked with me, so she knows what I'm talking about before she became famous. So anyway, Narda wants me to introduce Sarah. And in Seattle, Narda got up and said, Bob is making these points, and they're kind of interesting, but if you really want to understand what's going on here, you have to read what Sarah Bellotti wrote in the book, where his name is on the front, but she really did all the creative work. So I was outed by my wife at Town Hall in Seattle, and Sarah Bellotti. And one of the things about writing this book is, I'll admit it, I'm 4 times the age of my students. I'm not plugged in to all the gadgets, although I'm an early adopter and so forth. And in doing this research and doing this work, both Josh and Sarah were particularly important in understanding how people use the internet, what the significance is, speaking the language, and so forth. And so Sarah really, along with Josh, Sarah also wrote key sections in the book, and you'll be reading after. Sarah is unfortunately very shy, or I'd have her play a bigger role, but she told me she won't. Okay, so let me just explain what this is about, not take too much time. I'm not here as a Luddite. I love the internet, and I've loved technology. I'm not anti-tech, and in fact, our website, TruthDig, has gotten 5 Webby Awards in the 9 years we've been in existence from our peers in the industry. And we go back to these conventions in New York on Wall Street, and we rub shoulders with the people from Apple and Google and Tumblr and everything else, and we've been declared the best political blog, or actually best political site. And so, and we find a receptive audience. The last meeting, there was a celebration of honoring the late Aaron Swartz, who did so much for, to keep the integrity of the internet. And so I don't feel in these internet gatherings, I was just in Silicon Valley, I spoke in Palo Alto day before yesterday, I was running around Silicon Valley, and I don't feel out of place. I feel this is a comfortable community. I don't have $1 billion, so I'm not a full member of the community, but nonetheless, I feel in sync with this technology, and my concern, and I must say, my first graduate work I did on a IBM computer that took up a warehouse and has less power than my smartphone here, and so I've always been very excited about it. And let me explain my interest in the subject. I think the internet is the most promising, the swiftest technological change we've ever had in terms of its impact on society. I can't think of anything comparable. It has just changed everything. And in many, many positive ways. It seems to hold out the potential to really invigorate democracy, popular involvement, and so forth. There was a time when we thought in order for people around the world to communicate, you'd have to learn a brand new language of Esperanto or something of that sort so we could communicate. Well, the internet has provided that language. I can now read I spent time at the Center for Chinese Studies at Berkeley trying to learn Mandarin. Was a full-on task. I can now read almost instant translations from Chinese media anywhere else. We can communicate. We've heard about the Arab Spring. We know that ideas can circulate. One of the things that through NARDA's work with the Tillman family, we ran a piece by Kevin Tillman, who was with his brother Pat in both Iraq and Afghanistan. He wrote a very moving piece for Truthdig very early in our career. It crashed our servers. The request for the piece was so immense all over the world, and you could see people coming from Shanghai and Dublin and everywhere else. So there's no question this is a very promising technology. We know that. It also has the seeds of its own destruction, because the basic economic model of the internet involves the destruction of privacy. That's the only way big money is being made. It's something that is not discussed. It's not something that can be easily changed. The reason newspapers are in trouble, and the reason even broadcast television are in trouble, is they could not do targeted advertising with the vengeance that the internet can. At the old LA Times, they would promise the people on Auto Row, or something, advertise on Sunday, and you'll get all kinds of people to come in and buy cars and everything else. And the people selling the cars would, yeah, but do you have young people? Do you have, who's coming? And, oh, yeah, we have lots of young people, and we have ratings, and but it was mostly anecdotal and quite often fabrication. And then on Monday, the guy would say, well, we really didn't sell that many cars, and no one mentioned it. Don't worry, you would have had worse business if not, and so forth. So it was an imperfect advertising model. So is broadcast television with the rating system and so forth. The internet is a killer app for advertisers, no question about it. And that's why those ads mysteriously pop. People say, oh, it's so wonderful. I went to see 50 Shades of Grey, and now I have all these offers of erotic literature and relationships and everything, yeah, but you remember now, somebody's got that as your profile, you pervert. The fact is, it does something you could never have imagined, and it's not going to go away. And it involves destroying privacy. That's just the short end of it. And so 30 times today, I gave my thumbprint, right, to Apple and God knows who else, right? Certainly the NSA and everyone else. And if any government in the world had demanded you give your thumbprint before you buy a book or go to a restaurant or send an email or something, and then through that thumbprint, be able to know how far you read in the book you bought, right, and what song you listened to, and who the people were who joined you, and do all these things, you would think that was the most alarming example of totalitarian control imaginable. And we have surrendered it voluntarily, openly. Now, one reason may be maybe we're a nation that defines freedom as the freedom to shop, effectively. Maybe consumer sovereignty has ruled everything. But there's a kinder explanation, that we basically thought this was a private transaction in the sense that we were giving it to a company. And one way I got into this issue, I should say, is that when I was still at the LA Times, and my last book was all about this, I wrote about the Financial Services Modernization Act, the bill that reversed Glass-Steagall, the jewel of the New Deal, bipartisan, Bill Clinton, Phil Graham, Republican, and so forth, and ushered in the Great Recession. But one of the problems with that bill was that by allowing insurance companies and banks and so forth to get together, you were merging the data. And the question that was raised, William Safire, former speechwriter for Richard Nixon, who had become a columnist for the New York Times. This is, by the way, bipartisan. Bipartisan in destroying our privacy, bipartisan in trying to save it. When William Safire had a real bug about privacy and a concern, and he wrote columns, and he was joined by Ed Markey, who was then in the House, but he's now the junior senator from Massachusetts. I wish I had those two people as my senators, Elizabeth Warren and Ed Markey. But anyway, leaving that aside, I'm not supposed to be political or you'll lose your IRS status, everything. Shouldn't worry about it, okay. I want to court those demons. But anyway, the issue came up, what happens to this data? People who signed up for an insurance policy, which has medical records and everything, they didn't want to give it, that was Travelers Insurance was merging with Chase Manhattan Bank, or with Citibank in that case, and what happens to this data? And the privacy advocates like Sapphire said there should be opt-in. If they want to use your data for another purpose, they should be required to get your explicit permission. Okay? It was very simple because you gave this data to someone to get a life insurance policy. You didn't want it shared with third parties or any of the affiliates of that bank and so forth. And they said Clinton should veto the bill. Well, the banking lobbyists said, you veto that, make that change, we don't want the bill. The whole value is going to be in doing data mining. And this was back in the late 90s, data mining. And so their lobbyists carried the day. Clinton signed off on the bill. Instead, we got opt-out. If you learn that that's what all the junk mail you get is about. If you learn that something's being done and you don't like it, you can appeal and blah, 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 you'll never do it. And it's like reading the terms of agreement. It's a totally meaningless exercise expected to avoid honesty. So there isn't any transparency. But people didn't know that in pre-Edward Snowden days, okay? And they didn't know that because they assumed it was essentially private. Good old Google, they love us, right? And though they get 95 to 98% of their profit from destroying our privacy, after all, people forget, you are not the customers of Google, right? Customers have to pay for something. You're getting free email. You're getting free search, okay? The customers are the advertisers. You are the mark. Okay, your marks. Okay, and your data is going to be taken and used and so forth. And I'm not here to condemn Google. I'm here to praise Google at the end. Believe it or not, it's funny. I've done a number of these speeches now with techie type people, and I finally at the end I said, "What did I get wrong?" Because I always think I got something wrong, and it turns out they think I'm too soft on Google and Facebook and so forth. So I'll try not to make that error. But the fact of the matter is, these companies, Facebook, Google, so forth, even Apple now, which always stresses hardware, but in fact they're now into checking your pulse and health and everything. So the fact of the matter is, the economic model is one that destroys privacy, okay? And that didn't bother people too much, and it still doesn't bother them enough, which is why I felt the need to write the book. And by the way, I should say I started this back in, right after covering that Glass-Steagall reversal. I wrote an article for Yahoo Internet Life, which used to be a print publication, then cover issue on privacy. So I've been trying to follow this. And then you could have a debate about it. But after 9/11, it went out. And if you think about it, here's 9/11, which by the standard of the world was not the most compelling attack, okay? It never was existential and a threat to our system. We are the most powerful nation in the world. We have the strongest, you know all that, okay? And yet people after 9/11 said, oh, privacy, get over it. Of course, we'll do anything to be safe. Of course, we'll invade your privacy. And then, but we didn't know the extent of it. And we did have some indication, but then along came Edward Snowden. And Edward Snowden, to my mind, along with Dan Ellsberg, who's speaking on the other side of town today, are two of the great heroes of modern American history, as far as I'm concerned. And why? Because they led us in on an effort, conscious or unconscious, that results in sabotaging the basic contribution of American governance to the world. And I'm not going to say the framers and founders of our Constitution were saints. We know they were white males. We know they had their contradictions, et cetera, et cetera. We've all, read Howard Zinn. But I am here to celebrate two bits of wisdom in the history of this country that are the most important contribution. And two ideas. One is you cannot be a republic and an empire at the same time. And that was a very clear warning in Washington's farewell address, condemning the impostures of pretended patriotism, the language about foreign entanglements and so forth. The reason being, and they were very aware of scale, if you can keep it local, people have knowledge. People are informed. And if the people being the representative government, the people being represented, do not have knowledge, it's a meaningless exercise. It's sticking your finger up in the air with purple on the end and saying we just had an election. I voted for who the Ayatollah told me to vote for. It's not what we're talking about. And what they learned, but let's studying the example of the English Empire, Spanish, French, and of course Rome, was that if you are bent on this world domination or presence or control, you will end up lying to your people, you will end up deceiving them, you will end up keeping them in the dark. That in the name of national security. And that's what happened after 9/11. We lost the Cold War as a great reason for the military-industrial complex. Suddenly we had the war on terrorism. We had another enemy that's undifferentiated, okay? We don't have to distinguish. We now, Shia, Sunni, whatever. No, it doesn't matter. If they're in Indonesia, there's all undifferentiated. And so that's the first thing. And we had the Patriot Act. And we opened the gate to really a basic destruction of this notion of privacy. And I'll say something about that. And the second thing is this argument about we have a danger, after 9/11 it's all different, mocked the intentions and thoughts of the framers. Because the framers, mind you, who gave us the second big idea was one of limited government, checks and balances, separation of powers, accepting the Bill of Rights, okay? And the heart of the whole American experiment is you can't trust your leaders. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the people who enshrined these protections were, A, in a very vulnerable position, much, much, much more vulnerable than anything after 9/11. The English could come back. They did, right? 1812. If the thing had gone south, you'd be hanging from the nearest tree, all of you, Madison, Jefferson, everything. They also didn't particularly like the press. Kind of nasty, make up things, They didn't want the rabble necessarily assembling to redress grievances. They could be elitists. But they enshrined these protections. Why? Because as opposed to what we said, oh my goodness, Chris Hedges himself in the flesh.
Came to see you.
Oh, my goodness. Well, now that is intimidating. Okay, well, Chris Hedges, is a son of the Protestant church. His father was a great minister, and so there's special significance. But anyway, huh? No, so is Chris. Oh, yes, he's a minister now. I'm sorry. Okay, let me get back on track here. No, but seriously, the point is after 9/11, we treated freedom as an indulgence. You can't do it now. Get it over it, and so forth. Instead of recognizing what the founders did, who were in a far more vulnerable situation, freedom is not an indulgence, it's a necessity. It's not an indulgence in the best of times in the most secure nations. It's in fact a necessity in the worst of times. And that's a message, by the way, we have been sending to the world. Every country in the world could say, we have enemies, we've had dangers, we've had risks, okay? But at the same time, we have said, no, freedom makes you stronger, okay? And take the recent post-9/11 experience. We wouldn't have gone into Iraq, this place we've made. Who ever thought we could make Saddam Hussein look good? We're making Assad look good. We're making Gaddafi look good. We can make any monster in the world look good by our efforts to bring democracy. We bring chaos, we bring madness. It's absolutely insane, thoughtless. You know, and we have this ability. Why? Because we don't have an informed public. You could lie to the public about the basic two reasons for going into Iraq. There were no weapons of mass destruction. You knew it in real time, but you lied. And secondly, you lied about Saddam Hussein's connection with al-Qaeda. It was the one place in the Mideast where al-Qaeda could not operate. It's an absolute lie. And yet you make this intervention. So the second notion is freedom is not an indulgence. Freedom makes you stronger. Good ideas can drive out bad ideas. And we have betrayed those two things. Now let me deal with this word privacy. It doesn't appear in the Constitution, and I don't even like the word because it seems like almost an indulgence. I want my privacy, I don't want you seeing it, and so forth. If we think of the basic notion of the Constitution, it's a notion of individual sovereignty. Power starts with the individual. The individual cedes it to the state government, and then reluctantly to the federal government. And we retain the basic power. Okay? That's what representative republic is all about. That idea has been betrayed. Instead of our observing the government now treats all of us as saboteurs. We're the enemy. We're capable of treason. We're to be watched. Okay? And we're supposed to trust them. And if you think of just one startling example, the case of Hillary Clinton. And I'm really down on Hillary Clinton and Dianne Feinstein and Barack Obama for one reason, for calling Edward Snowden a traitor. Instead of, in the case of Barack Obama, he should have said, as a constitutional law professor, I am going to use the bully pulpit, and I'm going to tell you why we believe in limited government. I'm going to tell you why we believe in checks and balances, and I'm going to tell you about the Fourth Amendment. And as Chief Justice Roberts, and this is a place you may not want to celebrate Chief Justice Roberts, but last June, the Supreme Court issued the most important decision on this whole subject. It was really quite a surprise. And in that decision, Justice Roberts defended the Fourth Amendment. And he said this argument that the Fourth Amendment no longer applies because of modern technology, which you will hear, he said that's exactly wrong. The Fourth Amendment is more vital than ever. The Fourth Amendment, remember, starts with the Magna Carta, goes through English common law. And what was the assumption? The Fourth Amendment was that in England, with the king, even the king could not enter the hut of the poorest peasant and rummage about in his personal effects, right? Even the king could not do that. That was in English common law. And Justice Roberts pointed out in his decision that the American Revolution started over that point. That was the trial of Otis. That was what Adams wrote about. And he said the American Revolution started with that the agents of the king could not come into the homes of people living here. And when they did, they betrayed the trust that people still had in the king. And that's what the significance of the Fourth Amendment is. And Justice Roberts, in that unanimous decision, the liberals and the conservatives signed on, said it's precisely because of the technology that the Fourth Amendment has to be given a more robust interpretation. And he pointed out, in this phone, you have more information than was ever in anyone's home. And that protection has to extend. And what the court said, unfortunately, they haven't yet applied it to the NSA, the FBI, and everything else, and all these warrantless searches, which is what this thing is all about, these general searches, in clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. But they said, police arrest you, you have the cell phone on it, they cannot enter your cell phone because they don't, unless they have a specific warrant, and they can only use the material that applies to that specific warrant. And that was a unanimous decision in the Supreme Court last June. And I think is a source of some optimism. I'm getting a sign from my wife that I got to stop speaking. That's the good thing about writing a book. I go into all this in great detail, and you have to find God in 15 minutes, and I'm not him or her. So let me just try to wrap this up a little bit, and I want Sarah to read her section because I think it conveys the flavor of the thing. But I want to be a little bit optimistic here. What has been exposed is a basic contradiction in how we view, believe it or not, capitalism. And what we are dealing with now is a multinational model of capitalism. I actually wrote a book once called America After Nixon, The Age of the Multinationals, back in the 70s. We are in a world now where the nation state should be considered as something of an anachronism. I know this sounds like heresy. I go to Laker games. I have to, get all teary-eyed over the Star-Spangled Banner and everything. But the fact of the matter is there's an enormous contradiction. The multinational corporation is saying to the world, trust us. All we want is to make money. We are not beholden to any, nation state. Trust us over the Chinese companies. Right? The government of China should let us in, because even though we're American-based, we're going to protect consumers in China better than the 3 Chinese companies that are now driving us crazy, and among the top 10. And that's something you have to say everywhere, whether you go to Saudi Arabia, whether you go to Israel, Palestine, anywhere, okay? And what has happened is, until the Snowden revelations, the multinational corporations were in this cozy, contradictory relationship with the defense industry. And you have a military intelligence complex. The book details it in great detail, and most specifically, In-Q-Tel, a company started by the CIA in clear violation of their charter, provided seed money for hundreds of Silicon Valley companies. One of the companies most prominent in there that I discussed, Palantir, is a company that was started with CIA seed money in part. Their first 3 years, their only client was the CIA. They were given access to all of our information, and they now are the data mining model and provide the software for all the intelligence agencies, as well as the Los Angeles Police Department, the New Orleans Police Department, and others. This is a for-profit Silicon Valley company founded in part by the CIA and has this power. That's an more egregious example. The relationship of Google, Facebook, Apple, and the others to the CIA is somewhat murkier. They deny they knew this, they denied they knew about prison, they denied this. But until Snowden came along, they didn't say much about it and do much about it. But after Snowden came along, the contradiction between your role as a multinational corporation and your servile caving in to the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, becomes a glaring contradiction in the eyes of the world. European Union pushes back. Everyone else pushes back. You can't be part of tapping the phone of Angela Merkel and leaders of other states in Brazil and elsewhere. It's a contradiction in terms, and the fact of the matter is it will destroy your business model. It will. And so one positive thing that's happening is we are getting pushback from these very same companies. And so if you go to the excerpt from this book on our site or on Salon or something, on the bottom you will find a Google ad, and it will be a take action ad, and it will say, and you would think it was something some radical in Berkeley wrote, it says, join 3 million people in pushing back against the surveillance state all over the world. And then you're getting a very principled pushback from Wikipedia, the greatest invention on the internet. And you're getting a general pushback in the culture. However, there's a contradiction also, because this culture has been heavily influenced by the defense industry. Their profit model requires spying on us, and that's why I asked Sarah, who spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley interviewing these people, to read the section that she wrote from our book, and then we'll conclude, have a few questions. Sarah Bellotti.
I'm going to read as fast as I can from Chapter 5 on the military intelligence complex. The chapter begins with Regina Dugan, who is former director of the Defense Department agency that brought us the internet and GPS, as well as smart dust and mind-reading binoculars. I came across this woman who later became sort of a character in the book as I was researching Google's some of Google's more shadowy agencies. She moved from DARPA, the Defense Department agency, to Google's ATAP, Google's Advanced Technology and Projects groups. And it doesn't have an official website, and the function is seemingly impossible to pin down, but they do have a Google Plus page, and the description reads, Google ATAP, we like epic shit. The future is what we choose to make. We make what we believe in. Welcome to Google's Advanced Technology and Projects, a small band of pirates, makers, believers. So I had to look into it. And ATAP's budget and majority of projects remain secret, but the few details made public about the organization reveal that the future that its members choose to make is sort of a creepy one. And I'm going to read a little bit from, I'm going to quote Regina Dugan at May 2013 industry conference, where she gleefully debuted some of the technologies under development there. So this is Regina Dugan. We got to do a lot of epic shit while I was at DARPA. I wanted to do more of that. There are so many opportunities that can be realized by the advances of tech here. Let's just take authentication. Think of a means of identification that you can wear on your skin every day for a week at a time, say an electronic tattoo. So I'm wearing one here on my arm, and Dugan extends her forearm to reveal what appears to be a large microchip embedded in the skin above a stack of bangles and bracelets. Now, it may be true that 10 to 20-year-olds may not want to wear a watch on their wrist, but you can be sure that they'd be far more interested in wearing a tattoo, if only to piss off their parents, and the audience laughs. That's something you wear, but you can also imagine including authentication in just your daily habits. So I take a vitamin every morning. What if I just take vitamin authentication? I have one right here. She pulls out a tablet. This pill has a small chip inside of it with a switch. It also has what amounts to an inside-out potato battery. When you swallow it, the acids in your stomach serve as the electrolyte and they power it up, and the switch goes on and off. It creates an 18-bit EKG-like signal in your body, and essentially your entire body becomes the authentication token. That becomes my first superpower. It means that my arms are like wires, my hands are like alligator clips, so when I touch my phone, my computer, my door, my car, I'm authenticated in. First superpower, like, I want that. We're not shipping that right away, but here's the thing. This isn't science fiction. That pill has been CE stamped and cleared by the FDA. We at Google can tell that you've taken your pill. I'm going to stop there.
Okay, well, I just want to conclude on one note. I think this is reversible. I don't like the view that says we can't do anything about it. And one of the reasons is the reaction to what Sarah just read, and we found it in Seattle. We had plenty of techies, people working at Microsoft and Amazon and so forth in the audience. There's concern, there's a strong libertarian tendency in Silicon Valley, which is on the right side of this issue normally. There's a lot of pushback. And I don't think we should take this as inevitable. But I also think we have to be critical of people who are on the more progressive side. And I just want to offer one closing example, not to pick on Hillary Clinton. But you know, I drank the Kool-Aid, and at one point at a White House dinner, Hillary Clinton said I was her favorite columnist in America, and then she paused and said, no, in the world. Okay? So I've been on that side. But I am appalled at what she has said about this issue. And the only reason I bring that up is not only because she likely will be the Democratic candidate, but because take the case of her emails, okay? Now, we all have emails. We live by our emails. We express private thoughts, right? Most intimate thoughts, expressions, and so forth. Here was Hillary Clinton saying that she did not trust the U.S. government with her emails. That's what you got here. She did not trust the State Department that she was the head of, right, had been the head of, with her emails. But we, at All Saints, we should trust this very same government. It's absolutely startling. And again, it turns the basic idea of governance in the society on its head. We are not supposed to be the objects of suspicion. They are. That's the whole point. And finally, I just want to throw one in because I know there'll be people saying it makes us safer. So therefore, the hell with freedom. Shame on you if that's what you're thinking. But nonetheless, let me take that argument. The irony here, and I would say, even if you could show we're safer and so forth, that's, the ends do not justify the means, and you will be weaker. But the irony here is that our government has yet to come up with one clear example where gathering this haystack found the needles. And in Barack Obama's speech, he offered one example, which when we analyze all these examples in the book, one example, Mindar, the 19th hijacker in San Diego. Oh, we couldn't know who he was talking to in Yemen. That was a lie. He knew, Barack Obama knew, that Mindar was staying and renting from an FBI informant. He was under constant observation by the FBI. They knew when he left the country, they knew when he came back, and his partner. Secondly, he was also under observation by the CIA. And one criticism you can make, and it comes up in the 9/11 Commission and other reports, is the FBI and CIA did not compare notes, period. But the fact of the matter is they could have gotten that phone number from AT&T, who he was talking to in Yemen, in 5 minutes. It's absolute nonsense. You did not have to gather this whole haystack in the world to find out what these people are up to. Take the two most pronounced cases, the Boston Marathon bombing and the Charlie Hebdo massacre. In both cases, the people accused of those crimes were well known. Well known. In the case of the Charlie Hebdo massacre, one of them had already served time. All you needed was an old-fashioned cop, even out of shape, even half drunk, to go to their house and find out what's going on, right? Old-fashioned. You did not have to gather all of this information, invade the privacy of everyone in the world to do this. So it is not only a violation of the spirit of democracy in a very fundamental way, and I would leave you with one, but it's ineffective. Leave you with one chilling thought. If you've seen the movie Selma, you know that everybody's seen one of the things that's really depressing, and I find it with some of my students, unless they have been abroad or born abroad, is this idea that we have a benign government. Benign government. Just look at the movie Selma. We had the head of the FBI, right, J. Edgar Hoover, set out with his number two, well, Deke DeLoach and William Sullivan, 2 and 3 guy, to destroy Martin Luther King, to blackmail him, to drive him to suicide. Deliberate, clear. How can we ever think that our government is benign? Why should anybody anywhere in the world think any government is benign? And if we could assume they're benign, you don't need the Bill of Rights, you don't need the American Constitution, and this whole experiment in democracy has been a waste of time. That is basically what they are telling us. So I'll end. We only have a few minutes for questions. And
Hey, thanks. Okay, I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Hands up, please, over here. Thanks, Roman.
It seems,
Go ahead and talk, it's on. Don't mess with it. Just,
it seems to me that what you just ended your talk with leaves a lot of room for people to go out and buy guns to protect themselves from the government. And, obviously, we're getting millions of people buying more guns all the time. Would you comment on that aspect of the kind of approach that you're taking to the subject?
well, if I didn't think more kindly of you, I would think you were an agent provocateur, Yes, let's all get guns and protect them. The whole point of the Constitution, it seems to me, is that, yes, Jefferson said the tree of liberty has to be nourished from time to time by the blood of tyrants and patriots, but presumably the reason to have a constitution is you don't have to engage in that bloodletting. We're supposed to have rule of law, right? We're supposed to have the protection of our system. And what you're really talking about is not the need to get guns, is to find political leadership that will protect our rights. And I'll give you just one little example that came up in Silicon Valley while I was there. There was a report on the front page of the New York Times that there's this thing called a stingray, which we allude to in our book, which allows police agencies, and through Homeland Security, it's every police agency has all these toys now, to pretend that they're cell phone towers and to pick up the conversation of the bad guy, right? It's always the bad guy. But in the course of that, they pick up the conversation of everybody that thinks there is a real cell phone there, a tower, and they have this little gadget, and they have all this conversation. Clear violation of the Fourth Amendment, but it's a secret program. Yes, I will. And the people who are involved, like the sheriff of Santa Clara County, right there in Silicon Valley, said she can't talk about it because she signed a non-disclosure agreement with a company called Harris, which is a munitions manufacturer, defense contractor. And that non-disclosure agreement is enforced by the FBI. So a supervisor, one brave lone supervisor in Santa Clara County, said, I'm not going to vote for this expenditure because I don't know what it does. And I don't know who controls it. You know? And he was threatened. And the sheriff could not tell him who's called because she signed the non-disclosure agreement. So what you have is a total absence of supervision. You know, and that's why I brought up Palantir, I bring up these companies. That's what Edward Snowden, by the way, you know, Booz Allen, owned by the Carl, who's supervising Booz Allen? And there, Barack Obama, again, distorted it when he said Edward Snowden had channels. He knows as a contractor for a private company, he didn't have channels. And let me make one little point, and I'll get to you, that I haven't made. People talk about what causes Daniel Ellsberg to do what he did, you know, let us know what the Vietnam War was really all about. What caused that? Why isn't that question turned around? There's over 1 million people have the same level of security clearance that Edward Snowden has. The question I ask in a church where we're supposed to all pay witness, right, to deeper truths, what happens to that other 1 million of those folks? Where are the other whistleblowers? You know, where are these citizens that are supposed to be standing up against power, which our system is based on? Yeah.
Could speak a little to the recent hack of the Sony Corporation by presumably was North Korea. It just seemed strange and odd that our government so quickly pointed the finger at them. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, it's good. This came up after my talk the other night with some people who really study this, and they said they think it's a very weak case. And they think that at most it was third-party hackers who then sold some of this material. But let's take the case on the face. Here you have one of the most sophisticated electronic corporations in the world, and you have a 2-bit dictatorship. And they're saying that this 2-bit dictatorship can get their most vital, intimate data. So that does present the problem around the world. It means any government anywhere in the world can spy on its people. Any government. And this is a point made in Eric Schmidt's book, the former CEO of Google. What our government has done is said, not that that is dangerous to civil liberty, that that is dangerous to people's rights, that we ought to have rules about that, we ought to protect individual freedom and individual sovereignty and privacy. Our government has said to the whole world, this is business as usual. We can do it. We can do it with a vengeance. We can join with Israel and jamming and doing cyber war in Iran. We could do it. We do it with our own people and so forth. So instead of advancing a standard of we have this thing called the internet, it's a wonderful gift, let's protect it, let's keep it free. Let's keep it free from political manipulation by governments. Let's prevent those kind of attacks in that way. Our government has said, no, we can do it, and we're going to do it with a vengeance. And as I say, if on the face they are right about North Korea, it's a more frightening example. It means nothing is private. It means any dissident movement anywhere in the world will be subject to these kind of tactics.
I'm sorry, this is the worst thing we ever have to do around here is to close this out.
You could invite me to give the sermon in the main church,
Anytime. In Ed's absence, I would like to issue that invitation. So please join me. Bob's going to hang around, sign books, and if you have further questions, I'm sure he'll change them. And let's thank him for being here. Thank you.